Hello and welcome to another Substance on Substance. I'm Philip Graham, head of the economic substance analysis at Harneys in the BVI. I'm joined again by the Sultan of Substance, Josh Mangeot. We wanted to firstly deal with the code. We know that everyone out there is waiting for the release of the finalised code. I'm very happy to confirm we now have that sat in our inboxes. We're looking at that as we speak, and we understand that it will be available for public release by the end of the month. But the good news is it is there, it is ready to go, and we can all start relying on it very shortly. The actual main body of this podcast was really to talk about timing. We have heard a lot of anecdotal advice being given around this area in relation to the timeline that is involved with BVI entities and their economic substance requirements. And really I wanted to sort of hand over to Josh to very clearly explain the timeline that is involved for all entities that are incorporated or registered in the BVI. Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks for my new title there. At the risk of boring our listeners by being repetitive, the key takeaway is the BVI economic legislation came into effect on the 1st of January this year and had immediate effect for any entities that were incorporated on or after that date. The only exception was that there was a brief grace period which had to terminate by the latest at the 30th of June this year, and that was applicable to entities that were incorporated or formed on or before the 31st of December last year. So as a result, every entity is now in their first compliance financial period for these purposes, and those commencement dates have not been delayed. There have been references to an October date, but that has to do with a very narrow delay to some of the reporting obligations. It was not a change to the commencement dates for the first compliance period. And we have seen some incorrect statements in the marketplace and a lot of confusion around this. So we just wanted to make that abundantly clear. The key takeaway of this, and we've said it before, is you have to have moved to classify yourself by now, and you should already be compliant if the substance requirements apply to you. If you're in the situation where you haven't done that, or you're in the process of doing that, and you think some reorganisational changes may be required, or you need some assistance, then please do contact your BVI advisors.
That's exceptionally helpful, Josh. Just to really sort of reinforce this point, because we do understand that there's a lot of confusion out there, I'm sort of going to ask you some very quick questions, if I may. If you have a BVI entity, do you currently have to comply with economic substance legislation?
So that depends on the type of entity, and if it's a BVI company or a BVI limited partnership with legal personality, or a foreign company or foreign limited partnership with legal personality that's registered in the BVI, yes, you may do.
And does that mean that right now you have to have substance?
Not necessarily. The first thing is to ask yourself, am I one of those types of entity? The second thing is to say, do I have any relevant activity? And there are 9 types as defined. If that relevant activity is just holding business as a pure equity holding entity, then in fact the consequences for you may be negligible or very light. If you have relevant activity, you also need to be looking at the tax status of the entity to figure out whether or not you're exempt as a non-resident entity. And if the answer to the question is, I have relevant activity, I'm not a non-resident, then you need to look at the substance requirements that apply to you. And in many cases, there's a couple of reorganisational steps that you might look at making, which will bring you into compliance very quickly.
Now, if you have determined that this is not relevant to you, you don't have one of the types of entities, you're not conducting one of the relevant activities, you're tax resident outside of the BVI, is that it? Do you have to do anything else?
You need to have classified yourself, and you need to be able to produce evidence of the basis of your classification, because there are expectations from the International Tax Authority's public statements is that they will be looking for robust evidence of the basis for that classification for the first period, and where they can see that it's being considered, particularly with the professional advisor, except for in exceptional cases, they're unlikely to look much further beyond that. If you have no relevant activity, you will need to submit a nil return confirming that to your BVI registered agent in 2020, and the precise timing of that depends on when the entity was incorporated.
Thank you very much indeed. That's hopefully very clear to everyone.
Thanks, everybody.